Hey everyone, my name is Mike, and welcome to Crooked Commander, the show dedicated to showcasing some of the most interesting hidden gems of Commander deck building. The goal is not to showcase the quote-unquote best deck lists, but rather those that go off the beaten path to achieve something unique. For this episode, I'm going to discuss another deck that I hold near and dear to my heart, Veyran, Voice of the Paragon. In the command zone, we have Veyran, Voice of Duality. She is a legendary creature, Efreet Wizard, for 1 generic, 1 blue, and 1 red mana. She is a 2/2 with Magecraft, which reads, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, she gets +1/+1 until end of turn. She also has an ability that says, if you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes an ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. She's already her own engine. This is incredible. Now we just have to decide on what kinds of instant or sorcery spells we're going to use. But to answer that, I feel it's important to tell you the journey this deck went on. If you want to jump straight to the deck list, feel free to head over to the timestamp listed. This story goes all the way back to my very first Commander deck. I started playing Magic back when the Return to Ravnica block released. I was already a fan of both red and blue strategies and took an immediate liking to the lore behind the cards. Head of the red and blue aligned guild was Niv-Mizzet, a 25,000-year-old genius dragon who believes every experiment is worth it if it produces results. An explosion is still a result. So, I took a look into building Niv-Mizzet the Firemind as my first ever commander deck. Much to my surprise, there was a well-established combo with him. Niv-Mizzet has 2 key abilities. The first being that whenever you draw a card, he deals 1 damage to target creature or player. And you can also tap him to draw a card. There are 3 cards in the game that, in tandem with Niv-Mizzet, allow you to draw cards and deal damage infinitely. Curiosity, Ophidian Eye, and Tandem Lookout all have a way to grant the ability, whenever you deal damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. Have one of these attached to Niv-Mizzet, tap him to draw a card and deal a damage, which then lets you draw a card. Rinse and repeat. There were 2 main flaws with the deck. One was that it was easy to see through. Most of the time, my opponents knew what I was trying to do and would keep removal on hand for when I'd eventually cast my commander. 2 was that in a pot of 4 players, it was nearly impossible to knock everyone out before you ran out of cards to draw and ultimately lost the game yourself. Back then, Laboratory Maniac was the only card in the game that could cause you to win by having no cards in your library. Thassa's Oracle and Jace Wielder of Mysteries wouldn't come around for a while, and I certainly didn't have access to a card like Labman. I grew disheartened with the strategy and decided to put Izzet on the back burner while I focused on other decks I was more excited for at the time. A few years went by, and now that I was a more seasoned Magic player and deck builder, I decided to try my hand at Niv-Mizzet again. And unfortunately, even with the new additions, it was still coming up short. I should probably mention that I personally do not like to use counter magic. No hate to anyone if that's your thing, you're still welcome in my pod. Maybe that's why I can never make it work. Food for thought. Well, if Niv-Mizzet wasn't going to pan out, I needed something else to satiate my love for the red-blue color combo. I decided to look at another member of the Izzet League, in Melek, Izzet Paragon. He makes it so you play with the top card of your library revealed. You may cast instant or sorcery spells from the top of your library. And if you do, you can copy that spell. Alright, spell slinging. Now this feels like an Izzet strategy. But I had no idea what types of spells to run that could lead me to victory. So I took to the internet to see what others were doing, and I was met with what is still my biggest grievance with Izzet decks. None of them made sense. With every new deck I looked at, I found that I kept asking myself, but how do I win though? Then, I stumbled on a deck list that really spoke to me. Unfortunately, I have been unable to find it again so I could credit the creator, but what they did was they had a bunch of creatures with prowess and prowess adjacent abilities, and the majority of the instant and sorcery spells were pump spells, spells whose intent is to increase power and or toughness. So not only would the creatures get buffed by casting the spells, they would then get even bigger once the spell resolved and can swing in for big damage. And don't forget about Melek. Alongside some top deck manipulation, you'll be casting and copying spells off the top of your library over and over again. This backstory is already getting a little long, so I won't go into the decklist details, but I ended up making a similar style of deck for myself. I will leave a link to the deck list below for any of you who are interested. I'll be honest, this deck was pretty hit or miss, and having a 6 mana value commander in colors that don't ramp well certainly comes with its challenges. Then, everything changed when Strixhaven released. Veyran, Voice of Duality, released in the commander decks for the Strixhaven set. While it functioned a bit differently from Melek, it still supported the same general playstyle, copying the abilities of my creatures rather than the spell casted. And it has its own engine for it, built right in. On top of all that, it's half the mana value that Melek has. Gaining the title Voice of the Paragon for being the spiritual successor to my Melek Is It Paragon deck, the goal is to cast creatures with prowess and magecraft adjacent abilities that buff up their power and toughness, and then cast a bunch of cheap pump spells to get some big power. Here's how I do it. The spells for this deck are split into 6 main categories: Ramp, Draw, Recursion, Evasion, Pump, and Magecraft. Starting with Ramp, I have 8 spells in this category. You can definitely argue that this is not enough, especially in colors that don't ramp well, but I think the generally low mana curve supports this. We've got the usual Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Izzet Signet, and Talisman of Creativity. I've also thrown in Star Compass and Thought Vessel to have a few more mana rocks. I'll go into a bit more detail for these last 2. Birgi, God of Storytelling, is always a fun card when it comes into play in this deck. Due to Veyran's ability, I will get 2 red mana for every spell I cast. Remember the mana curve? Yeah, it pays for itself in no time. The last piece is Primal Amulet. While there are plenty of spells that only cost 1 mana and won't be able to make use of its first ability to make instant and sorceries cost 1 less, with Veyran's ability, you can get all the charge counters you need off only 2 casts. Then it becomes Primal Wellspring, now providing you with mana rather than cost reduction, as well as the ability to copy the instant or sorcery the mana is used on. Next is the draw section. I focus mostly on cheaper mana value options that have some level of top deck manipulation. I chose Brainstorm, Chart a Course, Opt, Ponder, Preordain, and Serum Visions. The 2 standout pieces are Rhystic Study and Archmage Emeritus. Rhystic Study because it's insane value in nearly any blue deck, also because I believe playing against a red-blue deck can never be too annoying. Archmage Emeritus, having the ability Magecraft, which lets me draw a card whenever I cast a spell, will of course have the ability doubled. Your hand becomes something like a Hydra. Get rid of 1 card, and 2 more take its place. Now let's talk about Recursion. This is the smallest section of the deck, being only 6 cards, but I believe is still important for later in the game so you can continue to have explosive turns after you've cast a bunch of your spells already. Every card here does it a little bit differently, so I'm just going to get into them. Epic Experiment, Exalted Flamer of Sinch, Festival of Embers, Keldon Flamesage, Oher Pakpatik Deepest Epic, and River Song's Diary. Next up is Evasion. There's no point in making your creatures huge if your opponents can just chump block them, so these spells help take that option away from them. Starting with the permanents in this section, we have Aqueous Form, Bria Riptide Rogue, and Smeltward Minotaur. Bria may have only recently been released as of the time this episode is uploaded, but I was amazed to see everything I want for this deck on a single card. Not only does it have prowess, it gives it to your other creatures. And don't worry, yes, multiple instances of prowess do stack. She can also make creatures unable to block when you cast non-creature spells. For the instants and sorceries, I went with Artful Dodge, Blinding Flare, Bluster Squall, Distortion Strike, Giga Drowse, and You Came to the Null Camp. Now it's time to get into the pump spells. I spent a lot of time finding the most efficient pump spells with the cheapest mana value. At the end of the process, I decided on Antagonize, Assault Strobe, Barge In, Brute Force, Brute Strength, Dreadmaw's Ire, Fists of the Anvil, Infuriate, Invigorated Rampage, Rush of Adrenaline, Siege Smash, Titan Strength, Twinferno, and Unleash Fury. There is one standout card in this section due to being the opposite of cheap mana value. It's actually the most mana expensive card in the deck. Dance with Calamity. This card has me shuffle my library and then exile cards off the top as many times as I choose. As long as I stop before the total mana value exceeds 13 mana, I can cast them all without paying their mana costs. Going into the largest section of the deck, we have Magecraft. Ironically, Veyran and Archmage Emeritus, who we already talked about in another section, are the only cards in the deck that actually have the ability Magecraft. The others have Prowess or some other adjacent ability that activates on instant or sorcery casts. I'll start with the creatures that buff themselves and or other creatures. Adeliz, the Cinderwind, Balmor, Battle Mage Captain, Electrostatic Infantry, Kenra Spellspear and its flip side, Gitaxian Spellstalker, Kiln Fiend, Mercurial Geist, Slickshot Showoff, Sprite Dragon, Stormwing Entity, Tempest Angler, and Trawler Drake. The other spells in this section provide additional assistance in copying spells. Beamsplitter Mage, Mirrorwing Dragon, and Zadahedron Grinder all let me copy spells that target only them. The latter two have me copy it for each other creature I control, while Beamsplitter Mage only lets me copy it once. Double Vision is an enchantment that lets me copy the first instant or sorcery spell I cast in a turn, and Alania Divergent Storm lets me copy the first instant, sorcery, or otter spell I cast if I let an opponent draw a card. Krark the Thumbless lets me flip coins to determine whether a spell is copied or returns to my hand. Getting to do that twice per cast can have some really silly effects. And then Ral, Crackling Wit. I don't usually like to run Planeswalkers in my decks due to them being easy targets, but this one's ultimate lets me draw cards and then gives me an emblem giving instants and sorcery Storm. Plus, with its static ability, the loyalty counters come in quick. Lastly, we have the land base. Starting with the Izzet staples, we have Cascade Bluffs, Frostboil Snarl, Riverglide / Lava Glide Pathway, Scalding Tarn, Shivan Reef, Spire Bluff Canal, Steam Vents, Storm Carved Coast, Sulphur Falls, Training Center, and as always, Command Tower. This deck has one utility land in Riptide Laboratory. While there are several wizard creatures in the deck, this is mainly here to help keep Veyran out of too much trouble. Taking a look at the color distribution, we definitely skew heavier red, so we're going to round out the mana base with 14 mountains and 9 islands. Alright, and here you can see the entire deck list. I am hosting it on Archidect, #not a sponsor. But if you are interested in getting a closer look, I will have the link to this deck list available in the description. So now we're going to go through and do an average playtest. Average hand, average playtest, see how well we do. Typically I want to have access to at least 3 mana in my opening hand to ensure I can cast my commander as soon as possible. And so I think we can do that here, so I'm going to keep this and see how we do. Starting here on turn 1, view our command zone. I think we are just going to start with a Steam Vents tapped, and then proceed to turn 2. Alright, over Pock Boutique. Now we'll play a mountain to untap the 2 for Star Compass. Alright. Proceed to turn 3, untap, draw, play this mountain, and then we'll go ahead and cast our commander. Alright. Moving on to turn 4, let's untap and draw. Now we gotta start getting some other things out here. Alright. I think we're just going to start by tapping 2 for electrostatic infantry. And yeah, I guess it's fine. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and tap 2 and cast You Come to the Knoll Camp. In this instance, if you had some opponents with some blockers up, you could choose to have up to 2 of them not be able to block. But because we're playing in a vacuum, I will choose the option Fend Them Off. Target creature gets +3/+0 until end of turn, and I will be targeting Veyran. So on cast, we're going to have both of these trigger because of Veyran's ability. If you casting or copying this in a sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control trigger, it's going to trigger an additional time. So first is going to be Veyran, which says it gets a 1/1 counter. Because that triggers again, it's actually going to be 2/1 counters. But those are temporary. However, once we go over to our electrostatic infantry, it just says to put a 1/1 counter on them. So these are going to be permanent, which is going to be good for next turn. Once we can start swinging. Alright, so that'll go into the graveyard. We'll enter combat. And we will swing 4 with our commander. 2, 3, 4. And then we'll use the experience counter to show commander damage for now. Alright, and then with that, we will proceed to turn 5. Draw. Alright, interesting. Still only 4 mana. Part of me kind of wants to play Rhystic Study or maybe the Primal Amulet. Oh yeah, and Veyran loses. It's custom so far. But I think the best thing to do right now would be to cast Kenra's Spell Spear. I won't be able to attack this turn, but that's okay. I just want to get it out. And now the question is, yeah, I think we are going to pay our other 2 to cast Twinferno, choosing its second ability to give target creature double strike until end of turn. I will choose to give that to Veyran, only for commander damage purposes. So Veyran's going to get its +2/+2 on the cast, as well as the extra electrostatic infantry. Technically, Kenra's Spell Spear would also get 2 1/1 counters, but we're not going to be swinging with it this turn, so we're not going to bother. So then we will enter combat, and we will swing 9 total with another... Actually, no, not 9 total, because I just gave him double strike. So 13 total, with 8 of that being commander. Alright. Proceed to turn 6. Remove the custom from Veyran. And let's draw a card. Okay, not the greatest, but that's alright. Alright, so now we have this island out. Now the question is, I think now we cast the Rhystic Study. So how I count cards like this when you don't really have an opponent in the vacuum is that I assume it happens once on the turn. So I'm going to assume an opponent casts a spell, and they are not going to pay the 1, which will let me draw the extra card. That is a non-creature spell, so Kenra's Spell Spear is going to get its 2 1/1 counters for the turn. I will now enter combat, and we will be swinging 2, 7, 11 total damage, with 2 of that being commander. Alright, coming down to the wire here, and then we will proceed to turn 7 with nothing else on the turn. So assuming on the opponent's turn 6, they have not paid the 1 for whatever they cast on Rhystic Study, so I will draw a card. And now I will draw another card for my turn 7. Alright, so we will of course play this island. I was really hoping to get at least one instant or sorcery spell this turn, but sometimes that's just the breaks. So I think instead we will cast 5. Oh, yep, those go away. Forgetting to do that. For the Alania Divergent Storm, the one that lets me copy my first instant sorcery or otter spell if I let an opponent draw a card. So I can't do much right now, and that is a creature spell, so nothing really gets bigger. So yeah, we're just going to take another turn to swing, and that's going to be 9 total damage to Commander. I think that's right. Yes, okay. 2 more Commander. So now going into turn 8, this is pretty much going to be the final turn, just based on how much life they have left, but let's go ahead and play it out. Still not another instant or sorcery spell. Oh wait, no, we draw the extra card because of the Heuristic Study. Double Vision. I mean, if the game was still going and I had instant or sorcery spells, having that out with both the Lania would have been pretty funny. But yeah, pretty much here, we just go ahead and swing with everything. With the 3 life left, that would be a win on turn 8 in a vacuum. But yeah, so this was the average playtest for Veyran Voice of the Paragon. Hope that gave you kind of a general feel for what the deck is trying to do, even though I only casted 2 total instant or sorcery spells that game, which is pretty low, but like I said, we try to pull just an average game. It's not scripted. I'm not here doing this 3, 4, 5 times over until I get a good game. It's literally the first one. But either way, hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got a feel for the deck. Yeah, thank you so much for checking this out. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Crooked Commander. If you like this type of content and want to see more, leave a like or consider subscribing. Do you have your own unique Commander deck list that you think deserves a spotlight? Leave a comment with a link to the deck list and it might become the subject for a future video. Thank you all again, and happy deck building.